Don't say this movie blew me away. Don't say this movie blew me away. Oh, this movie. What's going on, everyone? James here with another real review, and today we're going to dive deep into all my thoughts on Oppenheimer. I had the chance to watch this at my local Cinemark. Now, it wasn't for a press screening. I did see it in standard format, but next week I will be watching this in true 70mm IMAX, and it will be uncropped on one of the biggest screens in the world. So I cannot wait to get there and watch this movie again because, yes, guys, this movie's a banger. Oppenheimer is now in theaters and is rated R. It also includes the most nudity we've ever gotten in a Christopher Nolan movie, and admittedly, that kind of shocked me. Was not expecting all that, just putting it out there. But the film is based on the book by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. Now, this is definitely going to be an adventure. It's a 3-hour film, so you have to come in ready to go, and make sure you don't drink much water throughout the film at all. I made that mistake. Now, if you don't know much about the film, let's dive into it just a little bit right now. It's directed, like I said, by Christopher Nolan. This is his 12th film, and it's starring a huge ensemble cast led by Cillian Murphy, Robert Downey Jr., Emily Blunt, Kenneth Branagh, Florence Pugh, and even Alden Ehrenreich is in this movie. And he's darn good, too. We need to get him in more roles. Solo, you were good. I just wish everyone else thought the same. Now, the film is based on this American scientist, J. Robert Oppenheimer, who is the person who invented the atomic bomb. So this movie has some heavy, heavy subject matter. Now, I came into the film not familiar with Robert Oppenheimer's story at all, or the Manhattan Project, but if you also are in my shoes, don't worry. Don't Google anything. Just go in fresh, because the movie does a really good job at explaining everything to you. So with all of that being said, we gotta discuss the positives, the negatives, and my final thoughts. But before we get there, if it is your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where I love talking about movies, TV, and all the news in between. So if you do too, hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, tap on that bell, and hit the thumbs up button again if you are a big fan of Christopher Nolan, because I love his work. My favorite of his is still Inception, but man, his movies are so good to me. Dunkirk is the outlier. Don't really like that film, but with Oppenheimer, guys, we got some things to talk about. So let's start off right at the top with this positive, and it's this, guys. No one, absolutely nobody in Hollywood is making movies quite like Christopher Nolan. I said the same thing coming out of Tenet, and I felt the same way here with Oppenheimer. His unique and distinct style is really all over this film from the very first scene. And boy, does this movie just get right to the point pretty quickly, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the way Christopher Nolan directs this film, he does so in a way that doesn't glorify J. Robert Oppenheimer, and I'm so glad he went that route. It's a sensitive subject for so many people, and it should be. So Nolan doesn't shy away from showcasing the harrowing past of America's involvement in creating the atomic bomb, while also including several bits of social commentary, some that I actually was really happy he included. Christopher Nolan usually in his films doesn't have much social commentary, but it was nice to see that it trickled it into Oppenheimer and found its way into the script. But again, Nolan and the way he creatively plays with telling a story is so, I yearn for it, you know what I mean? And here he plays with two distinct styles of photography. It's black and white and color. Now the color scenes are described as fission, and the black and white scenes are described as fusion, and that's actually established very quickly. I didn't think they would get into it so fast, but I will say, my takeaway is both of these different styles have different points of view. With the color photography, you have the point of view from J. Robert Oppenheimer, and then with the black and white, it's the view from Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Louis Strauss. But if you're wondering which one is more dramatic, well, both of them are. Louis Strauss's point of view is him primarily in a committee hearing on his involvement with Oppenheimer, and with the color scenes, we get everything from the viewpoint of Oppenheimer, so it's chaotic, horrifying, sad, and anxiety-riddled. I mean, it establishes itself as one of the heavy hitters this year because it does things differently, in a good way. And I actually noticed that within the first 30 minutes because the film has an unconventional start. The way it begins kind of plays like the movie had already started an hour ago, and we're just immediately thrown into the middle of the story and into the mind of Oppenheimer, which is unhinged because he's going so far as to poison his professor. And if you know, you know. It's wow. But the editing is in a way kind of reminiscent of a film that's already in the middle. We get some montages and it feels like, again, we've already seen or already been in our seats for a while when, you know, we just had the movie start. And at first I wasn't really buying into it, but I eventually settled into the film. So 20 minutes goes by and the film really just sunk its teeth into me and it didn't let go. So if you can, stick with it past that 20-minute marker. And if you feel kind of similarly to me, just know it gets much better. And like with most Christopher Nolan films, the cast itself is worth the price of admission alone, and Oppenheimer is no exception. Let's begin with Cillian Murphy, who is our lead here and plays our scientist, Oppenheimer. He is excellent. It's about time that he gets billed as lead in a huge movie like this. He's able to convey all of the emotions of this character perfectly. Oppenheimer is egotistical, regretful, prideful, he's a womanizer, he's unfaithful, and all of these layers might seem maybe too much for one performer, but for Cillian Murphy, he's able to portray all of these layers very well within this performance, and the way he tackled this role is awards worthy. I really do hope that he gets nominated for this performance because it's gripping. He is just controlling your attention and he just doesn't let you go. And Cillian Murphy, I always knew he had it in him, but man, this is on another level. And then there's the second lead in this film, and that's Robert Downey Jr. as Lewis Strauss. Now I gotta say, this is his best, most dynamic role since Tony Stark in the MCU. He's not acted with this much gravitas since Endgame, and I know he didn't do much since Endgame, but thank God it was more of that, less of Doolittle, because boy, Doolittle was rough to get through. However, here, Robert Downey Jr. just proves yet again that he's an excellent actor. I mean, I knew of the man before Iron Man. I knew of him in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. But here is just, my goodness, the way he just dives into this role and lives as Lewis Strauss for the duration of this film makes all of the difference. And eventually, this character finds himself embroiled in a chess match with Oppenheimer, and I loved how the film leans into some legal drama and twist when we see the story through the eyes of Lewis Strauss. But it's not just about our two leads here. There are some sneaky good performances that stood out to me, so I'm gonna kind of go down my list here, and let's begin with Emily Blunt, who plays Oppenheimer's wife, Kitty. There are some emotionally tense scenes here that don't work if it's not for Emily Blunt. I can't tell you guys enough how much of a fan I am of hers, because whenever she's in a project, she always tends to kind of like take the spotlight when she's not even asking for it. She is one of those attention grabber kind of performers, and I loved how she acted in this role because it does demand a lot of somebody. You see, well, I guess I gotta hold that back. It's kind of a spoiler, but let's just say she's seen a lot. And then there's Jason Clarke as Roger Robb, who is the one cross-examining Oppenheimer as a part of the US's Security Advisory Committee. I don't know all those technical terms, so don't quote me on that one, but man, Jason Clarke, the dude is just aces in this movie. There's even a moment towards the end where he's shouting and I was physically uncomfortable. And I think that's the objective, but I'm like, stop fighting. And I will tell you, Jason Clarke, his performance here is probably the best I've seen of his in like years. And I loved what Benny Safdie did here as Edward Teller. I don't really know Benny Safdie as an actor because I know him more as a director. So whenever he's in films, I always think, that's Benny Safdie. But here, he blends into the role so well. At times, I was thinking, my goodness, could this guy get nominated for like a supporting actor award somewhere? Because he does a very good job at being able to ground the movie, but also be realistic. I mean, maybe, yes, that's the character he's portraying, someone who is trying to keep everyone honest in the room, but man, oh man, there are some back and forth scenes between him and Cillian Murphy that just had my jaw on the ground. And of course, a recognizable face among this cast is Matt Damon as Leslie Groves. Now, Matt Damon has his standout scene in this film where he's having a conversation. It's with Oppenheimer, and they're talking about the first steps to beginning the Manhattan Project. I mean, they're going back and forth, the dialogue is snappy, the score is swelling, and Matt Damon is so on it. I mean, this guy's been on it in Hollywood for a while, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that, hey, he's had amazing performances leading up to this. I mean, yes, he was in Air this year where he was excellent, and he's excellent yet again here in Oppenheimer. But prior to that, I was like, yeah, he's still got it, but I mean, he's not really been in excellent films. This, however, is an exception to that rule. So yeah, man, Matt Damon is just, He's so good here. And then rounding out our list is Dane DeHaan as Kenneth Nichols and Florence Pugh as Jean Tatlock. So Dane DeHaan isn't in the movie much, just like Florence Pugh, but both of them have an impact that really is indelible and something that you can almost remember after you leave the theater. But more so to Florence Pugh, she continues to prove why she's one of the best actors of this generation. It's just because of what she's doing. I mean, she's able to play so many different roles. They're diverse, they're complex, they're just so different from one another. But her filmography, there are so many hits with her performance alone. So yeah, Florence Pugh does an amazing job here. I just wish she was in the movie a little bit more. Similarly to Dane DeHaan, I wish he was also in the movie a little bit more, because there are times he's on screen and I'm like, this boy's evil. So outside of the acting itself, I do want to talk about the camera work here because it's phenomenal. And I love the cinematography yet again by Hoyt van Hoytema. This man does not miss. I am telling you, every time I see his name attached as cinematographer, I just know the project's going to be a visual masterpiece, and Oppenheimer is exactly that. Now, it says a lot when the scene, the atomic bomb test, which everyone is hyping up, is not even the best scene in terms of the way it's shot in the film. I think that there are breathtaking bits of cinematography that are above that moment. I mean, there are even suffocating moments with Oppenheimer that made me feel very anxious, and it's due in large part to how these scenes were framed and executed. We also get a lot of quick cutaway shots that almost kind of give us a glimpse inside of Oppenheimer's mind, where you see like lights radiating and stars, and I'm thinking to myself, knowing Christopher Nolan, he probably somehow practically filmed this, just like he practically filmed the atomic bomb test, which was really impressive. But I cannot believe that Hoyt van Hoytema continues to one-up himself. And of course, it's not a Christopher Nolan movie without an amazing score. So Ludwig Göransson stepped right up yet again. He scored Tenet and he knocked it out of the park. Here in Oppenheimer, he gets another A+ for me because his score is pulse pounding and it continues to cement why he is already in the company of the greats in music. Now, if you love Tenet, you'll find a lot of similar elements borrowed from that film in this composition. However, it's still unique enough to, for me at least, make me feel exactly what the film wanted you to feel. If anything, I feel a little bit more emotionally tied to the film because of the score. At times, there are stringed instruments that are being played with where Ludwig just kind of lets it swell or crescendo, and if you're in the black and white setting, you get a more calm approach where there's some subtlety to the score, and then when you're in the color moments, there's a cacophony of sounds at times that just, it makes me so anxious and I'm unsettled. But that's exactly what I think the aim was. And speaking of sound, the sound design in this movie is wonderfully effective. I mean, goodness gracious, man, there's this stomping of feet in the bleachers that we eventually find out, well, that leads to something, but I mean, you hear that at times and I'm thinking to myself, what's going to happen? Is the screen going to collapse right now? I mean, it's just so cool how unnerving the sound design is here. And it's largely because we're seeing this story through Oppenheimer's eyes, his point of view. I loved one scene in this movie, which is probably my favorite scene in the film, where Oppenheimer just goes up and gives a speech to a ton of Americans following the bombings in Japan. It's just awful. But what he does is, at first, he's like a deer in headlights. You can tell he doesn't want to be there, so all the sounds are kind of going crazy in his head, and eventually, when he's ready to speak, it goes silent, and it's muffled, and then you see flashing white lights, and I don't want to give away too much of what you see in that moment, but it is just excellent, and what it does for me is just cement why Christopher Nolan is really in a league of his own in the way he is able to orchestrate and direct a lot of these scenes, and kudos to the sound department. I mean, they just really do a great job in all of Nolan's films. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, this movie's a 5 out of 5, right? Well, not necessarily, because there are a couple drawbacks to Oppenheimer that left me feeling a little like this isn't his best work yet. So let's talk about the beginning of the second act, where I feel the pacing starts to get a little rocky. Eventually the film snaps back, but I do think there are a lot of momentum killers in this movie, and they come via the cross-examination scenes. At times, I'm like, all right, I'm feeling this like legal drama angle, and I kind of like the back and forth dialogue. It's pretty intense, but sometimes these interviews just get a little bland and predictable. At times it's just too exposition heavy, where there's so much dialogue happening and there's not much being shown on screen. Now, the film, when it does show not tell, it does a good job. But when it's doing a lot more tell not show, boy, it can get a little exhausting. So this movie does test your endurance. Like I said, it's a 3-hour movie, so you're bound to have some moments where the pacing gets a little off-kiltered, but I will say, the movie doesn't do it often. However, when it does, it's pretty noticeable. And while this isn't a negative for me, I can see this being an issue for others. The movie is not going to be accessible, and that's really because the film is, well, less trying to feed the mainstream audience and trying to maybe feed more of those who go in with the expectation that this is a Nolan film through and through. And trust me, there were some people in my theater after I left that said, "Boy, it put me to sleep." Never a good thing, right? So I think general audiences won't really love this film. However, if you are a fan of Christopher Nolan, or if you just love autobiographical movies being told in a unique way, I do believe Oppenheimer will be for you. So with that being said, right, we got positives, we got my negatives. What are my final thoughts on this film? Y'all, this movie's great. I will never not be excited for a Christopher Nolan movie, and Oppenheimer is a film that not only had me feeling unnerved, but I felt impacted in a way I haven't felt often this year. This is quality cinema through and through. I mean, Christopher Nolan's directing style is one that I absolutely love, so this movie had quite a lot of that. I love Ludwig Göransson's score. The acting was excellent in this film, and the final hour, that final stretch in this movie, is just full of amazing moments that will grip you and keep you and hold you and won't let you go until, of course, the final credits run. So yeah, this film is just very well done, and the story itself is pretty tough to tell, but again, I'm very glad Christopher Nolan decided not to glorify the story, but instead tell it in a way that lets you know, hey, this was not great. Like, this invention, this discovery was not a good thing for the world, let alone America. Now, does the movie sometimes bounce back and forth between feeling impactful and just kind of an endurance test? Absolutely. And I don't necessarily think it's enough to make this movie a bad film, but I can definitely understand other audiences not vibing with it. However, for me, Oppenheimer is a solid film in Christopher Nolan's filmography. Is it his best? No. But is it one of the best films of this year? Absolutely. And you might hate me for saying this, but I have a certain movie I recently reviewed still slightly above Oppenheimer. Again, it's personal taste, but Oppenheimer is still a strong 4.5 out of 5 for me. This is an excellent experience, and again, I cannot wait to watch this movie again next week in IMAX 70mm. I know I'll come away just noticing things I didn't get to see in a standard format, and guys, I just think, you know, the state of movies is always better when Christopher Nolan drops a banger just like Oppenheimer. So there you have it, you guys. That's my real review of Oppenheimer. Again, it's Christopher Nolan's latest. It's in theaters now, so when you do watch it, let me know down below in the comments what you guys think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Are you kind of right in the middle? And hey, if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, y'all, because while summer's coming to a close, this year is not done. We got so much more cinema to talk about right here on the channel, and I cannot wait for what we got in store. Alrighty, well, y'all, I'm gonna go ahead and try to rest after that experience. I'm tired, y'all. Alrighty, again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening. I made it through without no dad jokes or puns. I'm proud of myself.